Hello and welcome everyone with a new episode from The Fire Within. I'm your host today, Nia Madi. In today's episode, we are still with our guest, Sonia B-Inkster, an Indigenous educator and an instructor joining us today from Sudbury. Today we are talking about a very important topic. What is the non-status? What does it mean? Why would someone take your status away from you? All of these questions will be answered in our episode today of The Fire Within. Keep watching. People who are identified as non-status Indians in Canada are individuals who are not considered as registered Indians because either they or their ancestors were refused or lost their Indian status through the mechanisms of the Indian Act. I understood from you that it's because like an Indigenous person would get married to non-Indigenous person, so that would take away. And who decides that?
Well, see, we have to back up a little bit on that situation. When North America did not have Canada, US, French, like France, and England, British, came over, and the royal people of those countries made treaty with nations here, nation to nation. Many of the treaties east of the Ottawa River, and that's east of the Mississippi as well, were with the British Crown or the French Crown, not with a North American government. So the treaty rights are as a nation, not as an individual. The land is as a nation. So it's not like your property ends at the fence and your neighbor's property begins at no, this is community property, community owned, controlled, managed, whatever. However, when Canada became a country, and same with the US, or similar with the US, because they actually went to war, we negotiated. And that's a big difference between Canada and US. When we became a country, 1982, I think the Constitution came up here. The Canadian government tried to assert itself as representative of the Crown and turn Indigenous people as fourth-level Canadian government system instead of doing nation to nation, because it means that Canada is on stolen land. This is not a metaphor. This is legally true. Ottawa sits on Algonquin territory that they stole from the Algonquin people. No treaty was signed, no agreement was made. The natives were pushed off, and whatever, John A. Macdonald, Sir Wilfrid Laurier and all them, they just took it and said, yeah, we're going to build a government here. We're going to put buildings here. We're not going to ask permission. And we're not going to share profits either. And that was the whole point of the Indian Trust.
So what is the Indian Trust? Basically, it is started by a relationship between the First Nations and French and British that is based on military alliances and trade that was between the years 1700 to the 1800. At that time, the Crown didn't have any control on the daily life. Over the years, the situation started to change. The Crown didn't need the military alliance anymore, and the trust became a way of handling the revenues from the sale and use of First Nation territorials on behalf of the First Nations. First, dozens of these funds were created and combined into the Indian Trust Fund. A few years later, Britain stopped providing funding for Indian affairs and put the money to pay for the Crown treaty obligations.
The British and French trust established that we will have industry on your territory, we will make profit, and we will share some of that profit and put it in a trust so that you can be looked after forever in perpetuity. But the federal government, since the very first one, John A. Macdonald, has been underfunding food, health, education, housing, urban infrastructure on reservation on purpose, to get rid of the fiduciary responsibility of the Ottawa government for every Indigenous person with whom they had a signed treaty. if Ottawa decides whether you have status or not, then they can limit the number of Native people they have to sponsor. Because the Prime Minister of Canada is the landlord for every reservation. The landlord decides how many houses, who lives in the house, and when is the maintenance done, and how expensive that maintenance is going to be. So with the Indian Act, right, it was built to kill the Indigenous way of being, but also to kill the Indigenous people. Because if I don't have to give you the money that I know that I owe you, then I can be rich. And that mindset continues to this day when we have Indian Act Chief in Council. Chief in Council is responsible for the infrastructure on reserve. They're not responsible for the ancestral, traditional, unceded territories that the natives were taken from. The Eastern Cree, the Cree School Board in Eastern Canada, and the Haida Gwaii are two very strong examples of natives telling Ottawa, you will pay, you will fund, you're supposed to. It is your fiduciary responsibility when you took it over in 1982. We have to look at Ottawa making decisions for every Indigenous person in a way that non-Indigenous people don't have to imagine. If you're renting an apartment and your landlord is refusing to fix, you can go to the Tenant and Landlord Act and get redress. And your landlord is required to repair, have water, heat, hydro, electricity, whatever, is required by law to make this thing work. Slumlords, there are consequences for that, but not for the Prime Minister on the Indian Act. Non-Native people are not understanding that it's not because they want to live in crappy houses that they live in crappy houses. They're not allowed to modify the houses. They're not allowed to choose where to live, who builds it. And yes, there are examples of wealthy Indigenous people who've gone back home on the reserve and built their estate homes on the reserve. There are examples, but those are the exception. They're not the rule. For the marriage thing, when a Native man married a non-Native woman, her children would be registered under his name, so they would have their status according to federal law. But when a Native woman, until the 80s, married a non-Native man, the children were registered under the man, so the woman lost her status. And she, by Ottawa rule, she was not allowed to live on reserve with her non-Native husband and not registered children, because the children, by religious European ways, the children belong to the father. But
Wow.
by Indigenous ways of being, the children belong to the mother. And who the father is less important than are there men making sure that the women and children are provided for. It was her choice to be intimate with whoever she trusted.
A status Indian is a person who's registered or descendant from ancestors who were registered or were entitled to be registered. A person could be eligible for status if one of their parents or both were registered as Indians, according to the Indian Act. However, a child of a non-Indian parent and an Indian parent cannot be registered for Indian status. So, individuals who identify themselves as First Nations but cannot be registered, they become non-status Indians. Indigenous people lost their status for one of these reasons. 1. If a woman got married to a non-Indian man, that automatically makes her and her children born after the marriage no longer considered status Indians under the Indian Act. 2. Enfranchisement, which means that the person has to give up their Indian status for different reasons, Voting is one of them. Before 1985, a person could apply to give up their Indian status to vote in a federal election. After 1960, it became mandatory to give up their Indian status in order to vote in the federal elections. 3. Foreign residence. If a status Indian lived outside of Canada for more than 5 years, that person's name was deleted from the Indian register. These legislations are considered unfair and discriminatory. They are also demeaning to the Indigenous identity and the freedom of a woman to choose her partner or individuals to have the right to vote. Under subsection 91(24) of the Constitution Act 1867, Métis and non-status Indians are considered Indians who are not eligible for programs and services currently targeted to status Indians. However, Indigenous people see that this is just a way around to escape giving back what was stolen from them for many years.
Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and check out all of our social media platforms. For more information, check out our website.